Hey guys, it's Alicia. Welcome back. It has been a very long time since I filmed and posted a video. There are many reasons for that, my friends, and we're not going to get into that because it is personal. And as I am 19 now, my life is changing, I'm trying to figure things out. So it's a process. I don't know what's going to happen with this channel, so bear with me as I figure things out. My posting schedule is going to be very wonky, but hey, every so often that you get a video, you get to learn something, right? So that'll be good. So work with me, okay? But anyways, you see it in the title. Today we are discussing the history of disabilities. So just a little disclaimer. My young little friends in the audience, please, I don't recommend you watch this video. It is not going to be pretty, okay? There's a lot of sensitive information being thrown around here, right? Like, our past as disabled people is not that pretty. And I just want us to, learn from our mistakes, right? That's kind of what we're going for here. And you don't often hear about this in school. I guarantee you a lot of you in high school or younger, you did not learn about disabled people. I know I didn't. So here's a chance for us to learn, but let's also just, keep that in mind that this is not going to be pretty. So parents, I recommend you review this before you let your child watch it. That or just don't let them watch it. One of the two. Also, I've said it a couple times already. I will be using the general phrase disabled people since this is a general idea of treatments. So that will include mobility, disabilities like hearing loss, blindness, or if you use a wheelchair for whatever reason. That'll also include mental disabilities. So that'll include learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, things like that. So there's my disclaimer. I'm not going to waste too much time talking because this is probably going to be a long one. So let's get into it, shall we? Okay, so before I go into some of the nitty-gritty details of how, a lot of this played out in history, let's talk about the treatment. So this is a widespread, okay? These aren't from specific time periods. It changed, it developed, yada yada. These were just some general things that would happen to those of us who had disabilities if we were around back in those times. So at some points, people with disabilities were abandoned or killed at a very young age. Sometimes in like the Roman Empire, they were kept as gestures for the royalty. Drowned, burned, put in cellars, nothing pretty. In the early days of America, if a family couldn't, provide support for the kid or adult with a disability, you could have people pay to come and, basically mock them and, just stare at their oddities. It's terrible. It's real bad, you guys. And the list, it goes on. Those are just a couple of examples because I am not here to scare all of you. And honestly, even those ones are just terrifying. So during World War II, because a lot of the men were often being sent off to go and fight, there were a lot of vacant jobs. So people with disabilities were put into those roles, right? They were given jobs. Hooray, we get to make some money. But of course, that didn't last very long because once the soldiers returned, they took those jobs. And they were the ones who then did the work. So we lost our jobs. Boo. Yeah, that was a thing. Luckily, in the 1960s or 70s, the civil rights movement began, okay? So we all know what the civil rights are. I don't need to go into that. This isn't history class. But this to give people with disabilities a better chance of, success just in general, whether that be in the workforce, and getting a job, as a general thing, because that can be challenging. And once the treatment of people with disabilities was, like shown to the world, it encouraged a more supportive period of time of improving the conditions of which people with disabilities had in and out of school. So whether that be in the workforce, in their social life, or in school, whatever time period you want to pick. So with the civil rights movement, finally being there, more laws came into play. And obviously things had consequences, right? As everything does. But it did change, but it did expand how do I word this? It did expand the services that people with disabilities had at that time, right? And later on, a public law was made in the US, which changed the way that kids with disabilities were treated in school. So this caused a lot of educational laws to be formed, which did help those with disabilities. I'm sorry, I'm writing things because I have notes because I can't memorize all this behind the scenes. And of course, consequently, this expanded and changed some of the services that were provided for those with disabilities. Fun times, right? Not really. So with the vast number of laws and services being provided for those with disabilities, the treatment towards those people improved drastically. We went from abandoning them to trying to help them. That is major improvement in general. And it also put a more accepting light towards us instead of the hatred and judgment that we were used to. Of course, that doesn't stand true when it comes to the general population of other students in the schools. Depending on a person's past experience and background in general, their view could be, more positive or negative. So is it nature or nurture? Hard to say. Often, the person with a disability wouldn't ask for help if they needed it. And that was fear that they would be viewed maybe incorrectly or not like as an independent person who could do things, but needed a bit of assist here and there. Yikes. So if that didn't tell you anything, our journey to get to where we are now has been very long and rough. And just to give you a general timeline of how this all began, we're going to do a brief look at our history, okay? Here we go, y'all. We're doing this. So we're going back way back in time to the 1500 BC era to 500 AD. So like before Christ. And then I don't know what the AD stands for. If you guys know, let me know in the comments. I just don't remember. So during this time period was when the first recorded case of a person with a disability was, discovered. Mental disability specifically. And this was in 1552 BC. So long ago. Back then, however, it was required to either abandon or prosecute a person, specifically a child who had a disability. Since if the person was, disabled, they were seen as less than. If they were older, as I mentioned early in the beginning of this video, they were kept as a jester for the royals to entertain. We've come a long way, my friends. A long way. We are now into the 500 to 1300 time period. Still, long time ago. This was around the middle-aged period. So, and this was a time of fear and neglect. Oof. In 787 AD, an asylum was built for the children who were abandoned. Sadly, most of them did not survive. And ships were also built in this. Oh, what? Ships? No, cages, not ships. Cages were also built in the center of town to entertain people so they could mock the children. I really don't like this sometimes. I don't like this video. There were also ships used, and people could enter and see those with disabilities and go, ha ha ha. Why? The ship would sail from port to port, and a person could pay to go and see them. If I seem like I don't know, kind of acting weird during this video, it's because I feel very comfortable discussing this. So I don't like anything that I'm saying though. Oh boy. Okay, we are now in the 1300s, guys. 1300 to 1700 period. And science was evolving. It became a larger focus, more so than religion, because way back when in the BC eras, religion was a big focus, right? Like when you look back, it was always the church was the center of the community, and if you had an issue, sometimes you would go to the church and be like, "What do I do? Help me!" And because science was advancing, and more specifically in healthcare, there was more research being done on disabilities. So improvement, it's on its way. Okay, moving on from that time period. We're now in the 1700 to 1800 area of time, long time ago. So during the English Reformation, there were attempts to try and teach those who were deaf or blind. And that did encourage, an interest in educating those who did have disabilities. It also led to a better classification of mental illnesses and disabilities, which brought, a better record of individual cases of those with disabilities throughout history, which is kind of how we know some things now. And many services were provided that, were much more humane than what were once done. And the prisons that disabled people were once kept in, that is basically no longer a thing. Sort of. Work with me here. So moving on to the 1800s to 1950 time period, medical advancements were obviously happening. Hooray! Medical advancement, it's continuing into the time, and people would, speak out about the conditions that those with disabilities were living in. It was also believed that with proper training, a person with a disability would be able to, rejoin the community and lead a productive life. So in the 1840s, a training school was established for children with disabilities. And by 1850, in the US, an attempt was made to determine, the number of people with intellectual disabilities. So this is very specifically for the intellectual disabled people, or as they like to call it, intellectual deficiencies. So basically, a not so nice way of saying it, an intellectual disability. Or maybe even a slow learner. And this number had increased for the following decades. So there was a good amount of people. So by the late 1850s, the number of training schools in America had increased by a lot, but truly they were more used as a custodial care for those with disabilities. Um, and these institutions were built for this purpose in 1875. These asylums no longer supported, the goal they originally had, which was to educate and support those with disabilities to allow them to, rejoin the community. But instead, the schools segregated those who had disabilities. By 1923, a large number of private institutions had been built across the US. Hurrah! Not really. And in that same year, special education classes became common across the US, with almost, get this, 34,000 students being educated in those environments. As a result, professionals, began to see that there was a positive effect on educating and socializing those with disabilities instead of keeping them hidden away, locked in a cage somewhere. Instead of doing that, let's socialize them. Education. So we are now in the time period of 1950 to 1970. And from those years, parents of those whose children had disabilities formed a movement with specific goals in mind. So these are the goals. I'm reading them, so just, work with me here. Improving conditions in state institutions, create community services, initiate legislation, increase education, and increase employment opportunities. The main goals. So from the 1960s through the 90s, a wide variety of laws were placed to ensure that those who did have a disability were treated properly and fairly. And by the 90s, a lot of the states had closed their public institutions. Most states reduced the number and the size of these institutions. Ugh. So 1970 through now, in the late 1970s, self-advocacy movements began, and these were started by individuals who did have disabilities, who demanded to have their voices heard, be seen, be heard, let people know that you exist. By the 80s, living independently and self-direction became a very popular choice for those who did have a disability, again, instead of segregation. Allowing them to focus on making their own choices and having appropriate services. So by the 90s, the Americans with Disability Act was signed, in other words, the ADA, into law and addressed the discrimination of those with disabilities. If you want a better idea of what that is, I'm going to link a channel down below called Bailey Sarian. I hope I'm saying her name right. She does like a dark history podcast type thing, and she has a really good video about the ADA and disabilities in general throughout history. So if you want to check her out, I will link her down below. Definitely go and check her video out. It has a really good explanation of what that is. But the real question is, where are we now? Accessibility, as we all know, is in just major development. We are always working on that. So it's really hard to pinpoint exactly how far we've come, but I think you can kind of get an idea, right? We're not segregating, we're not abandoning them or killing them, those with disabilities. We're trying to help them a bit more, but of course, more could be done. We are always needing improvement, right? And the biggest form of, I guess, inequality that those with disabilities face would be ableism, right? not having braille on signs and stuff and doors, so a blind person can know where they're going. Having wheelchair ramps for those with mobility issues, so they can actually, go through a space. And public bathrooms need to be more accessible to those with disabilities, whether that be for a guide dog or for the wheelchair. And for deaf people, someone who knows sign language, a deaf interpreter, there to help them out when they need it. Those types of things. We're still missing that. But in terms of how we're viewed, it is more positive. Obviously, we still face discrimination. That still exists. Whether that be in the workforce, in school, socially, wherever that may be, it does still exist. But it's way better. It's improved. And yeah, obviously we've learned that by not segregating the people with disabilities, there's a chance of them being able to live in the community and make a difference and do good things, be in the workforce, or just, I don't know, be a part of the community. Yeah, in terms of, I guess, what could be done now in terms of, how we can help these people across the world, there are many organizations who pride themselves on helping those with disabilities to get a good education or get a good job, that type of thing. And you can very quickly Google these and find them. I can link a couple of the big ones down below if I'm able to find some. So definitely check there and see if I found any. But yeah, that was our brief, very shortened history on disabilities and the history of where we've come from. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, this is for educational purposes, right? Like, we're not here to reflect or look down on our past, even though it is very tragic and very shameful in a lot of ways. It's just, I guess, good to know where you've come from and make sure we don't repeat these same mistakes. I don't think we will, but it's good to learn from our mistakes and know where we come from, right? Right. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to like and subscribe if you like. You don't have to. I don't really care. But in general, have a great day, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.